Community Theater in Middletown. This is Ed Strother talking today with Bill Bartolini. It is Sunday, September 1st, 1985. The weather today is absolutely beautiful. Nice sunny. I would say it's in the mid-80s.
85, actually.
85? Mm-hmm. Very good. We are seated at the dining room table of my home at 1401, and Bill is smelling the flowers at this particular moment.
I'd like to say I'm sniffing the roses, but what are they?
But they're asters instead of roses. We wanted to talk with Bill about his experiences with Muncie Civic Theatre. But first of all, let's learn a little something about you, Bill, if we may. You're a native of what town?
Well, that's always difficult for me to answer. I was born in Pittsburgh.
Try.
All right, I'll try.
Pittsburgh,
Kansas. I set you up for that.
Yeah.
But we did move to historic Philadelphia when I was, within a year's of age, I guess.
And that means Pennsylvania.
That's correct. And then to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I had my Wonder Year Bread training in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I don't remember those wonderful ads on television for Wonder Bread.
No.
Build strong bodies 12 ways, and they would show a little kid growing up. Well, I grew up in Milwaukee in any case. Came down to Griffith, Indiana for high school, and eventually to Ball State University.
So you graduated from Griffith High School.
Mm-hmm.
But at what age did you move into Griffith?
Let's see, I would have been entering the 9th grade, so about 14.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why were you moving around in this fashion?
My father's a professional bookie.
No. All right, come on.
Well, that's his line. I mean, I'm really stealing from him. He is a librarian.
I see.
And as a matter of fact, just retired last month as the director of the Knoxville, Tennessee City County Libraries.
So he moved south again. Mm-hmm. So he was a great mover.
Right.
But you had your high school education there in Griffith. Right. You came to Ball State and majored in what?
Majored, as I recall, in theater.
All right.
Speech and theater, as a matter of fact.
Speech and theater.
I thought you were going to ask me why I came to Ball State, and I want to answer that question, whether you're going to ask it or not.
All right.
May I? Good. Mm-hmm. I came to Ball State because my father wanted me to go to Purdue.
All right. That makes a great deal of sense.
Mm-hmm. I think it's appropriate.
All right. What is the most memorable recollection you have of your college days, Bill?
How about if I tell you my first rather than my most memorable?
That's good.
All right. My first was of sheer embarrassment and humiliation. I don't know if you really want this on tape, Ed Strother, but it's because the very first play I was in at Ball State was Tartuffe, that you directed.
Yes, I think maybe.
Bruner played the lead.
I remember that.
Ed, right? Ed Bruner?
No, Joe.
Joe Bruner. That's right, Joe Bruner, who I later directed at Civic Theatre in Wait Until Dark.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, along with his wife. He was the antagonist to his wife, the protagonist.
Right.
Sharon Blue Bruner. That's right. Very good. Okay. In any case, I remember Tartuffe because I so liked the play when I saw the Indiana University troupe tour it to Gary, Indiana, and I was quite fascinated with it. When you were holding tryouts for it down in Muncie, my freshman year, I tried out for the play, thought I was a great actor because I'd done a lot of things in high school. Of course, I soon found out all the things I didn't know when I came to college. But I got a role as one of the guards. And I think it was opening night. I made my grand entrance and stood there at attention. And after a while, probably 20 or 30 minutes on stage, at least it seemed that long, as a guard at the door, I decided that it would be all right to rest and go to parade rest. And the other guard was still at attention.
Now, who carried the manacles? I've forgotten.
Oh, I don't remember. I had a masthead or something to carry. But the other thing then I've decided that was not a good idea, so I went back to attention, but I knocked a chair over upon leaving, and I left it. And the stage was a circular rake, and so, of course, it clattered. as it fell off
I
the
do
12-inch
remember
rake.
that.
Do you
now,
remember that?
But I didn't remember you were the one who
Oh,
did it.
yes.
I just remember the chair.
Is the interview canceled now?
No, we'll go ahead
All right.
And work it through. Well, what else did you do when you were at Ball State?
Well, let's see. Did a number of shows, did a lot of studio theater, and enjoyed studio theater. It was my first introduction to a non-proscenium stage. Played around with Doug Stark, and trying to think of who he hooked up with, Ed. Did Beef and Boards Theater, and Zare, Bob Zare. Bob Zare. Hooked up with him, and let's see, Doug directed Thurber's Carnival, and I'd known Thurber as an author, but not as a playwright, and that was a great deal of fun. Did a number of shows. In fact, the first show I directed was there, and that was Robert E. Lee and somebody else who wrote The Night Thoreau Spent in Jail.
Yes.
Robbins, Professor Robbins was my advisor for that.
Faculty advisor, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Did you do any radio, television?
Oh, I took a few perfunctory classes, but not very much.
Didn't
I did
get
a radio
into
drama.
production.
Well, I did a couple of radio dramas. One was of The Apple Tree. Did a cutting of Passionella, and also a cutting of Adam and Eve, the Mark Twain story from The Apple Tree.
Mm-hmm. Following graduation from Ball State, I think you went immediately to IU, didn't you?
No.
Well, tell us what you did.
Well, I went into a quest for money.
Did it work?
No, it was a vicious world. Well, it did for a while, I suppose, but I found out that that was not my standard. My senior year at Ball State, I got a job working out at Sears and Roebuck. A gal by the name of Joan Dyke, who is a Muncie Civic Theatre season ticket holder, great gal, hired me out there to work in the hardware department. And her hiring remark to me was, okay, we're going to hire you on here in the beginning of the summer. You're not going to be one of those people who quits at the end of the year, are you? And I assured her, oh, no, Mrs. Dyke, of course I wouldn't do that. Well, I ended up staying 6.5 years and worked my way through Sears and Roebuck. I worked as a salesman in the hardware department. Later on, I went to my the store manager, Donald Thielman, after I graduated from Ball State, and I told him I needed to pay off some school debts. Did he have a full-time job for me? And he gave me a full-time job selling shoes on commission. So with my degree in speech and communications, I guess back then it was speech and theater, in hand, Alan Huckleberry graciously granted me that as chairman of the department. I went to sell shoes. Within a few months, as I recall, I was manager of the shoe department. Shortly thereafter, I was granted several other departments and managed them. And over the years, I managed the men's store and eventually the children's store. And after about 6 years at Sears and Roebuck, I went to the store manager and I said, I'm kind of interested to take on some more responsibility. Where do we go from here? And he said to me, Bill, it's time you settle down because you're pretty good at this. And you ought to do it for the rest of your life. And I could hear those cavernous words, the rest of your life, echoing in my mind. So I decided to go back to school, finish my master's degree at IU. I felt very uncreative at that point. Even though I had been active at Civic Theatre, by that time I had directed a Neil Simon play, The Gingerbread Lady, with Judy Schroeder, Ross Rowland, and, oh dear, I will have memory lapses throughout this tape,
well,
I'm sure.
It's called early Alzheimer's.
Oh, thank you.
All right.
So I
when you
went
went back to IU, or when you went to IU, you into what department?
Well, I did go into theater, again, because I knew theater, and I felt comfortable there. I felt that even though the theater degree would not necessarily get me a good job somewhere, I knew that I did not necessarily want to go into professional theater. I knew that it would solidify how well I directed plays. Solidify really some of my relationships in real life. Not that all of my relationships have been theatrical. But rather that I felt as if I owed a great deal to theater because I was able to live so many more lives than I could have otherwise. I feel that I learned a great deal through theater. I mean, if one looks at Blanche Dubois in Tennessee Williams' play, one has to learn something from Blanche. At least I hope.
Well, you didn't play that role.
No, I never played Blanche, and I doubt that I ever will ever. But from seeing various plays and from being in them and seeing how the characters react, I think I've learned a great deal.
What was a big moment at IU for you?
Playing Milo Crawford in Luann Hampton Laverty Oberlander.
Oh, my.
Yeah, and having the potato chips work. Milo Crawford is a meek little fellow. I got out my glasses that I used to wear in high school, and I would put them on without my contact lenses, so I could barely see a little bit. One of the real key bits every night is if I could open the bag of potato chips, and they would splatter everywhere. And there were certain nights when I didn't get the potato chips to splatter naturally, and other nights where they went everywhere. And, of course, I had to scurry around and pick them up.
Yes.
Quite a little bit.
And then following the degree, you came
Following the degree, I came back to Muncie.
Now, what degree?
Well, I got a master's degree, an MA, in theater theory and criticism. My master's thesis was on farce in the 1970s. Studied House of Blue Leaves, which George Irving directed at Ball State.
Yes.
Many moons ago. Studied a variety of different shows that were farces, including Terrence McNally's The Ritz.
Mm-hmm.
Oh dear, this is a few years ago, and I don't remember the others, but I do remember a great indebtedness to Margaret Curtis, because she helped me edit my master's thesis and helped me get the blankety-blank thing done.
I'm glad you said that. I'm glad that has been made a matter of record.
Oh, it says so in the foreword, too.
All right. You come back to Muncie.
Right.
And you do get involved with Civic Theater. And that's where I think we ought to pick it up.
Okay.
Because we want people to understand your role in Civic Theater.
All right.
Now,
I'll tell you, I came back as a person who hadn't made any money for a year. And Civic Theater was trying to get a managing artistic director. And one way to get such a position funded at that time was to fund that position through a CETA.
CETA.
Right, and Comprehensive Employment Training Act.
That's right.
Very good. So since I had not made any money the previous year as a graduate student, I qualified. Here I was with master's degree almost in hand. The thesis wasn't done there. Getting a CETA position, and it worked fairly well for a while. The gals in the office had a great time because here was someone who could speak English, and who could joke with them, and who was not, who had a little more education, I guess. We'll leave it at that.
Well, it might have worked well for you, but it worked well for Civic, too.
I think so.
Because this was the first time we had some kind of continuity throughout the year.
Exactly.
And that is to say, hired help, somebody to answer the phone and track down problems and that kind of thing.
Right. I must tell you, Ed, that I was fired.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes.
I'm not sure you want to make that a matter of record, do you?
Well, I will. It happened on the day before my birthday, so it happened on April 2nd. And, I don't know if I can tell you what year. I would guess that would have been about April 2nd of 79. It might have been April 2nd of 80. Probably 80. And CETA employed a lot of CETA people to manage the program. And the CETA employees of the CETA program handed out too many CETA positions, so they ran out of money.
That's why you were fired.
And so I was fired.
It was not for any dereliction of duty.
That's correct. Well, I'm glad we were able to set that straight.
Well, I know that you became president of the board of Muncie Civic. Now, that couldn't have been when you were on the CETA program.
No.
It had to be after.
Shortly thereafter. I was fired, as I said, in April. In June, we had the annual meeting and the elections, and Judy Schroeder had approached me and said, why don't you take on the job?
Why Judy? Why?
Judy was the president at that point.
I see.
You know, come to think of it, Ed, this is horrible not to remember these things better, but I think there might have been a year intervening there. We'll have to go back and look at the official
We'll let somebody
record.
else check on that.
While they're doing that, let me go on to tell you that I then, of course, became president of Civic. I think we did a couple of things in my year as managing director and a couple of things in my year as president. The first thing we did was we rejuvenated the season ticket sales. I brought a sales background from Sears and Roebuck and some experience working with the Brown County Playhouse, and also some experience being responsible for the press relations at the IU Theater, where we had built up their season ticket plan. And I'd read Danny Newman's book, Subscribe Now.
Subscribe Now, yes.
Right.
It's
what
rather
a blessing.
Celebrated publication.
Right. And it became a very natural thing to apply some of those ideals to Civic Theater. So we had a major campaign drive where we raised the prices for Civic Theater season tickets, and we had an early bird sale that spring. The first time that I think that I was aware of that Civic Theater had a spring season ticket drive. And there was some real ruckus because people thought, oh my gosh, I'm buying my tickets in May, and the first show isn't until October. And naturally, we banked the money. And as I recall, we banked that first year about $10,000. And interest rates rose, and we made a handsome profit off of that, which, of course, went into the building.
That's good thinking. Good thinking.
Well, I can't take all the credit for that. That's partly happenstance and partly being in the right place at the right time.
When you were president of the board, Bill, who are some of the people you remember as being very helpful?
Well, certainly I remember Judy Schroeder as the immediate past president. And she had a position on the board as president emeritus. And was very helpful. Bill Barnes, who was sometime within his tenure on the board, the city controller under the Alan Wilson administration, was very helpful. Later on, Bill Peterson. We seem to have a lot of Bills. Bill Jennings in the box office, Margaret Curtis in the box office. Later on, Wiley Spurgeon, and John Mark Johns, who succeeded me as president of Muncie Civic Theatre.
Is there any one name there? And this is really embarrassing.
It certainly is.
Any one name that you want to say really, really, really helped you out? I wonder about the interest rates. If you didn't do this alone, who helped you with interest?
Well, Bill Barnes took care of the interest. I mean, he was our financier at that point. I would have a difficult time. Jeff Carter was very involved, as I said. Judy Schroeder was very involved. I'm going to decline on even answering that.
Well, good for you. Good for you.
There were a number of people.
That's a better way to do it. How about productions, Bill? A lot of Bills here. How about productions? What production during your year as president?
Well, I was president the 50th year. Now, I might as well be very truthful.
What year is that? Come on.
Probably 80, 81.
Probably.
Okay. And I should tell you that, well, let's see. It must have been 81, 82, because we were incorporated in 31.
All right. Are you getting picky? I really don't care.
All right. But it was the 50th season. Although we were incorporated a year after we began, so it must have been 80, 81.
All right.
In any case, I must tell you that there was a bit of a flap, because I was the president the 50th anniversary season, as we called it. And that was, again, one of those promotional stints. There was some dissension among the board members, because the theater was dark for 2 years during the war.
Yes.
And that would have been in the late 40s. And did not actually...
Early 40s. Early 40s, yeah.
Okay. Did not actually produce a show those 2 years, although some people did some radio dramas, and I don't know who those people were. Again, we can let someone else look this up in the archives. But it seemed to me that rather than base the numbering on how many seasons we'd actually produced of full seasons of shows, that we ought to base it on when we were incorporated and when we first started, and so we made it the 50th anniversary year. We did Dulcy that year, which was the very first show that Civic did, and we did a repeat of that program. I played Leach, a movie producer in that program. Rob O'Brien was in it. Oh dear, I can't remember all of the people in that. Rob Connect was in it. There's a Bill, another Bill. Brian Lau.
Okay.
I'm going to stop there on those.
Is that the big thing?
I suppose that in some ways was the big thing of that particular season, although I think a number of other things happened that were not show-oriented.
Was this the biggest in quality?
No. No, Dulcy was not one of your real barn burners. In fact, some people would have been thrilled if the theater would have burned down around the cast.
But what? All right then. What was the big thing for the year?
Dear.
I asked that because
I'm not really sure I know.
Well, when I talked with Irish Walsh, he said the lousiest show he was ever in was The Swan. And I'm just trying to play the other extreme now. 50 years later, almost 50 years later, what was the big thing? Well, but if you don't have one.
I don't have one. I could be egocentric and pick some of the shows that I did. The previous year I did Fiddler on the Roof, and I thought that was pretty good.
It was. It was very good.
I don't think Charlie's Aunt was as good as the Fiddler I did. Cabaret a few years later was pretty good.
That was very good. I enjoyed that very much.
I seem to have these things with Jewish and Nazi plays.
Sure. Okay. Now.
But I can tell you some of the behind the scenes. Can we switch to that?
Do that, sure. Just so long as it's colorful.
It will be colorful. We will talk about the highlight of my career in terms of behind the scenes, and that, I think, was probably the Muncie Civic Theatre toilets.
Oh, tell me about those.
Well, as you know, Muncie Civic Theatre got a grant every year from the Indiana Arts Commission. And in order to receive that grant, we had to sign a little form because the money originally came from the National Endowment for the Arts, which said that we allowed complete accessibility to the handicapped. And we didn't because our two restrooms, we had two one-seaters, were down in the basement. That is a seater for men and a seater for women. And so we secured some community development monies to redo our restrooms and make them accessible to the handicapped. And I had to do a lot of lobbying. Had to lobby with a handicapped rights group. I think it was probably called the HRA or something like that in town, a committee appointed by the mayor. We had to lobby some of the political officials. And I believe it was under Mayor Wilson, Alan Wilson. We received a grant of just shy of $15,000 to redo the restrooms. One of my most memorable evenings was the evening we argued about whether the women should have a two-seater or a three-seater. And of course, the final concluding argument was that it takes longer for women, and therefore we got 3 seats for the women.
Okay, well, that's a nice bit of human interest.
Yeah, but there were other things that we did too, either in my tenure or shortly thereafter. We began the Boyce Block renovation. We worked on the facade. We talked with the Historic Preservation Commission to get additional funds for it. We also purchased the end building. The Boyce building is actually, or was actually, 3 separate buildings owned by 3 different people. And a fellow by the name of Reed, Steve Reed, bought the middle building from Margaret Grafton Benham. Had I known that he was going to buy it, I think I would have suggested that Civic buy it for the additional space, which we needed desperately.
Yes.
We did not get that building, but the corner building, as we came to call it, on Jefferson and Main, came up for sale. And an offer was made to the trust department of Merchants Bank, who was handling that, by a couple of lawyers who wanted to level the third of the building to make a parking lot because they knew that they could make more money with a parking lot than they could renting the building to Kim Payne. Yes. Well, fortunately, we had some people who told us that, and we held an emergency meeting of the board. We got a line of credit at Industrial Trust, Mr. Sursa's bank, who immediately gave us a line of credit of $10,000 on our signature because we were a worthwhile nonprofit organization, and we spent $18,000 and bought that building.
Oh, dear. I didn't know that. That's how it worked.
Yes.
That's really tremendous.
Happened very quickly.
I think maybe we ought to bring this to a conclusion.
Okay.
This is Ed Strother talking with Bill Bartolini on September 1st, 1985. And the weather outside is still beautiful, and still probably 85 degrees.